All right. I am here today on All That Jam with Danny Kaminski. Danny, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Not too bad. It's been a Roots music project kind of day today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been really lucky to get to chat with a whole bunch of folks that are going to be performing alongside you at this week's Modern Jazz and Soul Festival in Boulder. And I am super excited to talk with you about that and everything you do. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the kind of music that you play?
Yeah, I'm a jazz bassist, but I love hip hop. I love soul. I love R&B. I love anything with the groove. I'm a huge funk head. Um, so yeah, it's a big range of things. I guess I would under that kind of funk and soul umbrella. I guess things under there.
Yeah, and you're speaking my language because for me, all of that really coexists, and I hear
Mhm.
so many elements of similar things across all genres of music, and that's definitely something that I love about this podcast is kind of bringing it all together, and I think your work definitely does that. Let's talk a little bit about Roots Music Project and the upcoming festival. Really, really excited for that. You are going to be performing, I believe, with your quartet on the main stage this Friday around 6:30, I think. Is that right?
6:30. We're the very first show of the inaugural festival. It's like the opener of all openers.
Oh, I've actually had the pleasure of doing something very similar with a DJ set and
Mhm.
a big event, and it's great to be able to kick things off. Um, I would love to know kind of what you're planning for your set and also how you think about a festival set as maybe compared to a regular show.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me preface this with saying that this is probably, I mean, this is my first festival.
Mhm.
This is my first outing as a band's leader besides like small bar gigs. Um, so the idea going into it is that I want to make a really big impression. I want to make a very tailored set of music. It's a lot different than like a bar gig where you can kind of just like call tunes and everything. Um, this is definitely a very rehearsed thing with set transitions, um, different like guest artists and things like that. Um, so yeah, it's been a ton of fun to prepare. This is just my group. We meet every Friday, just after classes and everything, and just play some really cool hard music. And then when this gig came around, I was like wanted to kick it into overdrive and get this thing together.
Very cool. So who will you be playing with on Friday?
Yeah, they're all CU Boulder students. So we have Gabe Hazelton. I always want to say Gabriel, but his full name is actually Gabe. Gabe Hazelton on piano, who's a freshman who's just like mind blowing. We haven't had like many piano players come through the program, so to have like this kid come through, just unbelievable. Andy Mandabach on the drums, another just unbelievable drummer, who's been like a mentor to me in a lot of ways. Athea Evett singing vocals. So she's part of the new vocal jazz program at Boulder. It's brand new to this year. So again, just like the piano, it's been awesome to have new folks around. And then Camden Johnson on saxophone, and he's a senior. He's the oldest in the group, so he's kind of like holding it down in that regard.
Yes. Well, I know that Roots Music Project has a lot of different community focused events and programs. Are you connected to RMP in that way also?
I could definitely stand to be more. I've gone to a couple shows there. I saw Reggie Wooten in August and ended up being like a whole dance party, which is so cool. Um, and yeah, I would love to come out to more jams and everything. I really love what RMP is doing for the community, kind of like making more opportunities. It's exactly what we need.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate everything they're doing.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I'd love to dig into that a little more. So I live in Denver, very familiar with the Denver Boulder scenes for a long time, and in my perception as a fan, um, I feel like the support for live music in this area generally is is really strong compared to a lot of other places in the country.
Hmm.
That said, that's just from where I am standing and grooving, right, in the audience. What is your take on that? Do you feel like this is and Boulder and Denver might be different, I think also, but do you feel like this is a good place to be starting off a music career? How has that been for you?
I think it's a great place to start a music career. I think,
Mhm.
gosh, let me think. Well, in Boulder, there's the whole college scene, and even if it's not the music I'm playing or like listen to all the time, it really says something that a DJ can put together an EDM set and have like, get hired at frat parties and everything, and people are going crazy. Boulder also has a really big indie rock scene, with tons of shows, and that's a scene I've always really wanted to break into. Um, so yeah, there's just music happening all the time, and there's so much support for it, and I'm really, really fortunate. That being said, there are definitely venues like closing down, and everything, which is like Mercury Cafe just recently switched ownership, and
Mhm.
that weekly jazz jam is over. Um, so I let me think. Sorry. um, I think it's beautiful though that regardless of venues closing down and everything, people are still going out to see shows. With Mercury Cafe, that weekly jazz jam, I was talking to some people my age, and they're like, "Okay, well, we'll just hit up the Roxy on Wednesday then." Nothing. Even though venues are, some are shutting down and they're giving us support. It's kind of beautiful that musicians and the fans alike still want to go out and
Mhm.
are so adaptable to it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen over time, there are always going to be shifts in programming, ownership, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But I agree with you. I think overall the appetite for live music in different forms is very strong. I've lived in all different parts of the country, and I've been lucky to live in some pretty great music markets. Northern California. I'm from the New York City area,
Mhm.
but I've also lived in places where that wasn't true. Um, no offense to Raleigh, North Carolina, great place to live. But when I lived there for 15 years, it was kind of a music desert, and it was really hard to find local shows. When bands would come into town, it was a huge deal,
Mhm.
and it wasn't something that was necessarily easy to get to all the time. And so I'm glad that that's been your experience. I definitely run into a lot of people, artists at different points in their career, who very proudly and kind of clearly vocalize how important their college experience was for them, wherever they happen to be, that the programs that they were involved in not only set them up in terms of the actual performing piece, but also in terms of I guess networking and community, and kind of always having this sense of, I went through something, with these people. And I find that even many years later, people who were in the same program or attended the same school tend to find each other and will often play. Do you agree with that? Is that something that you've started to see in your time at CU?
Yeah, I think so. Um, I think a lot of it. Let me say this: I've gone through phases with music school myself. Extreme phases of being extremely jaded, and then being like totally swooning for it. Um, I kind of had this misguided notion going into it. I never liked high school or anything like that. Um, I kind of had this misguided notion that it was gonna
Mhm.
be like this savior for me, and of course it's not. But I think especially a smaller program like Boulder, it brings in so many cool different people and it's such a tight knit community. And I
Mhm.
was just talking with some friends about this gig, and they agreed, like, at a bigger school like maybe Berkeley or UNT or something, which most of us had the chance to go to. We're not sure that this kind of free collaboration to like put together our own set would have happened. There's
Mhm.
like no teachers involved with this. It's a totally student run operation. which I think is really cool. I think students need that chance to put something together like that. So yeah, I definitely agree. I don't know. I guess I can't say if it's like music school, like the classes are doing it, or if it's just if you put that many people in a tight knit setting and you're always doing stuff together, then naturally they're going to be
Mhm.
gravitated towards each other.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a lot we could change about music school, but I love being able to play with people. You know, I love having that shared language. So
What would you like to see shifting in programs like that?
I wish there was, in general, I wish there was more invitation to collaborate like that on students' own terms. And
Mhm.
I guess I can understand that they do want it. Like a lot of the times they do want their own programs and everything because they also have their own people to answer to. You know, they have donators. I don't know if that's the correct word,
Mhm.
but they have people they need to answer to, so they have to put together sets and everything. But he, I think if students got to collaborate more, we'd have more chances like this. I think it's really special that Roots Music Project is even taking a chance on a student-led quartet with all students. Um, and these students are making cool music, you know, like really, really cool stuff. Um, so I would really love to see that collaboration fostered. And I'd also love like venues taking that risk. And I understand it's hard, you know, like as a venue, as someone who owns a venue, are you gonna go with the option that's always gonna work, like the hardened veteran who always brings in a great crowd, or the student show who could show up late, forget gear,
Mhm.
not have a good set, all those things. But you know, the hardened veteran becomes a hardened veteran by messing up a lot, by
Mhm.
being that young guy and messing up a lot and doing a ton of shows. Um, so anyway, I just love to see. I- I'd love, I'd love for there to be more spaces to mess up. Basically,
Mhm.
is what I'm trying to say.
Totally. No, I mean, that resonates in a huge way, and I think you're totally right. And because of the proliferation of so many management and booking groups that sometimes can have a little bit of a monopoly maybe on a venue or just develop such a strong working relationship with booking folks at venues that it doesn't always leave a lot of room for other things. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and those spaces are really important for anyone in any kind of career, but I think in music especially. And that does make me think, so this has come up in conversations that I've had with artists of at all points in their careers, which was this concept of, there's the music and then there's the business. And on the business side, more and more, I've heard people say, I wish I had a little more grounding in how I'm supposed to act, or, around the topic of contracts or getting paid, just having those experiences, or even, marketing, as much as we all would really prefer for artists to focus on what they're creating. The reality is that so much these days of everything is, I'm going to use the dreaded word content because it's one of my least favorite words. But do you all touch on that at CU Boulder? Are you talking about kind of the businessy management side of things at all?
Yeah, I guess we could stand to have more. This is I might say some harsh things, but I want it to be clear to CU Boulder and anyone watching that I'm not trying to slander. Don't sue me, you know, whatever. Um, and let me preface this with saying we literally have an entertainment lawyer coming to class tomorrow to
Mhm.
talk about some of this stuff. So they're doing really good. I wish there was more about marketing. I wish there was more about contracts. We
Mhm.
took a class called Introduction to Music Business, and it didn't touch on any of that. No touring, no contracts, no
Mhm.
like how to keep your brand. And I think what's happening, you know, more and more people are enrolling into music school, and music school is this awesome place kind of disconnected from reality, where you can live and eat on campus and you kind of just live and eat to practice and
Right.
shred, and all your teachers are there to help you shred and everything. But what's happened because of that is that the market is so oversaturated. You know, you can look on Instagram and find a million bassists who can just shred your socks off, you know.
Mhm.
So more and more now than ever, I think it's a lot less about chops and more about marketing yourself, you know, like and I just wish that was something that was taught more, how to market your name, how to market a show, um, how to advertise yourself, basically. So
Yeah.
I think there's definitely improvement to be done. I think schools and just a lot of institutions like that are kind of stuck in the past a little bit with
Mhm.
like, we're going to get our students to shred as hard as possible, which, don't get me wrong, is important. I love to shred. Um, but you can't make a career out of shredding anymore. I don't think you
Mm.
can really.
Yeah. No, that I think I appreciate that. And as a journalism student from many decades ago, in an industry that even at that time was shifting incredibly far from its roots, I understand where you're coming from, and I think that's a very fair assessment and very respectful. So I appreciate you being so honest about that.
Mm.
So if we think about touring, if we think about kind of that lifestyle, is that something that you would see for yourself? Kind of where would you, if you close your eyes and think, 5, 10 years out, what would at this point kind of an ideal career look like for you? Because there's so many shapes that can take.
Yeah, and it's changed a lot. I
Mhm.
came into school, I was a hardcore jazz bassist through and through. Like, all I knew was Christian McBride and Ray Brown. Pretty much only played upright bass. Um, and and at that time, I really thought I was gonna go to a jam and, like, gosh, I don't know, a 90-year-old Sonny Rollins was gonna be there and be like, "You're the bassist for me. I'm gonna take you on the road." Obviously, that doesn't really happen anymore. Um, so I think at that time the thing was, I'm just gonna like tour forever, and
Mhm.
that's kind of that's part of the jazz tradition. I think is like just going on the road, really hitting it hard. I think these days I'm a lot more into like writing music and everything. I would love, 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 love to go on tour and see the world and everything, but I think I like staying home too much for it to ever be a very permanent thing. I think my dream down the line is to like build my own home studio, whatever that may entail, and just be able to record music on my own terms and everything, and then go on tour when I want, um, which I understand is optimistic because there's a lot of people you have to answer to. But that's kind of the dream, is to be able to
Mhm.
stay home, record music, experiment with stuff. That's really what I'm into.
Yeah. Well, touring is, as we all know, and we all can kind of see this. Not only is touring expensive, of course, but I've been reading, and there's a punk band that was interviewed for, not a Denver-based band, but just an article I read at some point in the last 6 months or so that said they had calculated, and it was about 21 days for them on the road before they had covered all their tour expenses.
Yeah, much less turn
And
a profit.
right. And so that could be different, of course, for different markets. There's so many factors involved. But that was the first time I had ever seen anything quantified like that, that kind of put some parameters around the reality. And they're doing it. That's something they made the decision, like, yes, that's something we want to do. I've also talked to a bunch of artists that feel very similar to you, that for one reason or another, um, either touring is just not for them, which I think is extremely fair. And I think that doesn't really get a lot of play, is that it's not for everybody for any number of reasons. It's a very specific kind of lifestyle that may or may not appeal to someone. But for those artists that are able to especially reside in a place where there is a good scene, where you can, within an hour or two, kind of get to a bunch of places like we have here. I think there are potentially some really great benefits for having that dedicated home base. And in this area, there's enough people coming in from all over. that I think there's a lot of opportunities for different things like sit-ins, or, you know, if you are working on music, to have people collaborate. I would love to know about your writing process. How do you do it? Because I'm not a musician. I
Mhm.
love hearing artists talk about, you know, where they start typically when they're thinking about sitting down to do some writing.
Yeah, it's hard. I I watched this Marcus Miller clip. Marcus Miller is, of course, the amazing funk bassist, and he's written a bunch of tunes. And they asked him, like, "Do you have a set method for writing a tune?" And he said, "No, because that's how you end up writing the same tune over and over again." um, and so I think about that, and I try not to get. I think the word stuck is wrong because it sounds a little too negative. I try not to get complacent, I think, with my writing process. So a lot of the time it starts with lyrics, or it might start with a piano thing or a guitar thing, or kind of rarely is it a bass thing that it starts out with, just because it's, for me anyway, it's kind of hard to visualize a song from the bass. But sometimes it does. And then it's just this process, really long process of fleshing it out over many hours. You know, I just yesterday I spent I think about 2 hours on 8 bars of music, which is like, I don't know, 13 seconds total. um so yeah, it's a long process, but you also have to, and this is what's hard for me a lot of the times. I'm very hard on myself, and I'm a very big perfectionist. So the thing I have to remember is to separate the writing process and the critiquing process,
Mhm.
because so often I'm in the writing process and I'm like, no, this is dumb, before it can even get off its feet, you know? Um,
Sure, that
yeah.
makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, I know that you know, that idea of kind of perfect getting in the way of something that's great is real,
Mhm.
and I experience it myself in. I work in research. I experience it all the time in my day to day work, and it's a really tough thing. Something that I've heard over and over again from people that have kind of been out there doing their thing, you know, in some cases for 2, 3 decades, is there's a there's a sense of um, really being able to get comfortable with
Mhm.
things like space, you know, space between notes,
Yeah.
uh, letting not so much extended silence, but just kind of letting something develop in its own way. And I'm curious if in your live performances, you mentioned jamming, is that improvisation? What kind of does that look like for you? And if so, how do you like to handle it? Like a jam session, is there communication? How does that look?
Yeah, it's one of the great things about jazz is there's kind of a codified language with how a lot of, like, especially jam sessions go. Um, so in a lot of ways, I've kind of like co-opted that into my own jam sessions, even if it's not jazz or whatever. So a lot of the times it's like, and you'll probably see it on the show on Friday. A lot of the times it'll be like, keep soloing, you know, and it's totally informal. But I like stuff like that because it's like, it's this energy, you know. It's this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's this kind of like volatile, like, whoa, anything can happen. I've always thought that jazz was, it's kind of like the punk music of its day. And I really love punk music as well, on top of everything. And I'm kind of always trying to get that energy of punk into the crowd. Not to the extent like, is this guy gonna throw his bass at me? But you know, to the extent like, whoa, anything could happen. This is
Yeah.
really improvisation, you know. Um, so anyway, it's just cool to be able to use that kind of jazz language to be able to direct things. And um, you know, a lot of the times it's just like a look and the person will know what to do. And that just comes from playing a lot together. So
Right. Oh,
yeah.
sure. And I want to also mention Joseph. Thank you so much for putting some of your thoughts in the chat. I think that's from YouTube. I just want to read one of these. I think this is really great. So he said, best advice ever received. If you want perfect music, program it. Right. So kind of utilize the tools. If you want
Yeah.
something that's authentic, and natural, and then music that's magical. Just play it and don't overanalyze. And that is magical, without a doubt. Yeah. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. I love that. And there is a magic to it. And I think that's why people like me, for, most of my life, have sought out as much live music as I can. I love studio recordings as well, for different reasons. But to me, there is absolutely really nothing better than being able to witness that magic happening. And to me, that's exactly how it feels.
Mhm.
And so when you talk about things like kind of being able to look over at someone and you just kind of have that trust with them, to me, that's what it seems like. I don't know if trust is the right word,
Yeah.
though.
Mhm.
It is. Okay.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. I would imagine that, and then over time, that turns into probably something even deeper. But I see that with, not just with bands that have played with each other for a long time, but when I see collaborations, even just knowing, where someone's come from and knowing their work, you can kind of see between people on
Mhm.
stage how they're in so many different ways communicating with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really beautiful thing.
That's so amazing. Well, Danny, let's think about, beyond the festival, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute.
Mhm.
What are some other things that you have coming up, either for spring, summer, later in the year? Anything else on the horizon that you'd want to share?
Uh, yeah, just a lot of recording music. I'm hoping to get a really good body of recorded music done by the end of summer. Um, be on the lookout for my Instagram and TikTok pages and everything, which I can post up somewhere, for some of that. Yeah, and then just playing gigs here and there. It's kind of senior recital season here at school, so playing in a lot of recitals and stuff. And it's been, yeah, a lot of fun.
That's amazing. And I'm curious, because I do like to ask people this too. Is there a venue around here, in addition to RMP, of course, that you would just really love to play?
Ooh, there's so many.
It's a lot. I know that's a tough question for an area like this.
One of my favorite cafes in the world is the Laughing Goat here in Boulder. And they used to have a weekly jazz jam. I would love to like bring that back someday. Um, and like a long-term goal would be Red Rocks. That's like my dream, is to like sell out Red Rocks. So
You know what? Sometimes saying something out loud just feels so good. And so I
yes,
appreciate you sharing that.
of
Um,
course.
Let me chat a little bit about the festival coming up. So, tickets for the Modern Jazz and Soul Festival, which is happening Friday and Saturday, so just in a couple days. I've seen them on Eventbrite mostly. So, if people want tickets, I think that's a great place to go. Tickets are around $32 for a single day pass and only $50 for both Friday and Saturday. And that's hours of music starting around 6:30 each day until I think around 11. So lots of good music and a huge variety too, of different artists, which I am so happy about. I think that's going to be a wonderful thing. Several stages. So make sure to head down there if you are local. And Danny will definitely be posting all the relevant links so people can find you, and find your music and what you're up to. I just want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Perfect. All right. So, Danny, stick around for just a second. I'm going to take us out of here. And my co host, Kevin, who could not be here today, would be very happy to hear me say, make sure to like and subscribe to all that jam. I always forget that part. And we will be back with more interviews and a few other folks who are actually going to be playing with you this weekend as well. All right. Let's take us on out of here.